Good afternoon and welcome to Open Classroom. I'm Janet Gillen, the Director of Professional Development for the Brown School, Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you so much for being with us for today's program. For our participants joining us on Zoom throughout this webinar, you are muted. We cannot see or hear you. We also can't call on raised hands, but we really do want you to be a part of this conversation, as many of you have already been chiming in with your greetings and checking in. We appreciate that. For folks joining us on YouTube, we're really glad to have you here. We don't have a way of directly engaging with you, though. I want to thank and acknowledge my co-host, Cynthia Williams, who's the Brown School's Assistant Dean for Community Partnerships. She's going to be helping to moderate the chat, as she so ably does, and also in the Q&A portion of the program, really sort of stepping up to be your voice in the room. Before we get started with today's program, though, I want to just let you know what else is coming up this week, because this week and next week super busy for us, which is great. All kinds of interesting content. Tomorrow at 12:30, we'll be back on with the third in our series related to the COVID vaccine. This program being race, risk factors, and equity in vaccine distribution. So registration is still open for that, and it will close very early in the morning. You're more than welcome to still join us if you're interested. And then Thursday at 12:30 also, we'll have Doctors Gerard Hollins and Andrew Thiesing delivering a talk on public administration, finance, and government budgeting. Okay, but today's program. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Beth Brawley is a licensed professional counselor who specializes in treating anxiety, including OCD, social anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, agoraphobia, and specific phobias. In addition to her clinical practice, Beth is a member of the adjunct faculty at the Brown School and a frequent presenter with the Professional Development Department. In our MSW program, she teaches applied behavioral therapy. As the pandemic has put many of us under either a different kind or maybe even a different level of stress than we've experienced before, I think the perspective of an anxiety specialist is really helpful. So here to speak to us about tolerating uncertainty, cultivating compassion for ourselves and for others in changeable times, please welcome Beth Brawley.
Thanks, Janet. Thanks, Cynthia. I am really excited to be here. These are, when Janet and I were brainstorming about this talk, I was so excited. These are some of my favorite things to talk about. So I do want to give everybody kind of the game plan for today, where we're going to be going. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about all the shifts that we have noticed in our lives over this past year due to the pandemic. There has been so many, and we're not going to go over them all, obviously, but we're going to look at some common themes here so that we can move into how we really saw uncertainty play out in our daily lives, minute by minute, moment by moment. And then looking at some of the things that can fuel someone's either feeling inability to tolerate uncertainty or they're feeling able to tolerate that uncertainty. So we're going to look at the self-criticism component within that. And then I want to move on to my favorite piece, the 3 components of self-compassion and how we can really employ them in our own lives. So largely we'll be drawing on research of Doctors Kristen Neff and Tara Brock, really awesome researchers that have a lot of great resources out there for anybody who's interested. So we will get going. If I can move to the next slide. Here we go. So if we're looking at, okay, what just happened? Blindside, I don't know about everyone out there, but I felt pretty blindsided by how quickly everything was shifting from our typical, and even though our daily lives may have many changes in them throughout the day, we're looking at, I would say not one piece of our lives was left untouched. And so we looked at the fluid nature of what we were being told or information we were gathering in terms of, I remember at the very beginning when everything happened, so seeing as I specialize in anxiety disorders and OCD, I had so many people reaching out to me terrified with all these videos of, am I supposed to wash my food? Am I supposed to wash my nail? What am I supposed to be doing? The CDC says this, but so-and-so says this. And so really, how do I keep myself safe in this? And so I think that there was so much confusion and a lot of scrambling for something that could make us feel safer, feel more able to tolerate what was going on. We largely saw self-care and coping mechanisms being taken away or changed. I know I have a lot of clients that, have an exercise routine at the gym, or, join friends for hikes, or are on sports teams, or do different things that, really overnight were all taken away. And so things that we had been using before as very healthy parts of our mental care routine, all of a sudden being shifted in a large way. My next point being therapeutic progress and the process was altered. And I don't say taken away, because it's not that, we go kind of back to square one, but, I would say for those of us who are, working on challenging ourselves in our daily lives, either through, exposures, therapy, whatever it may be, we're looking at, like, I'll give some examples, my clients that have contamination OCD, well, immediately I wasn't able to actually, give them some of the same exposures that I typically would be under more typical circumstances. Or think about for someone who is has been struggling with feeling kind of lonely or isolated, someone struggling with social anxiety disorder. And so we had been working on getting them out in public around people. And all of a sudden that was greatly changed. And then this last point is something I've been thinking a lot lately, this idea of intimacy and community being punished by the virus. And so looking at, as humans, we need that community, we need that intimacy, we need other people. That's how biologically we are driven for survival. And that means, having your team, having your people around you. And so again, immediately that was cut off. And not only was it cut off in a way of, this is not something I can have right now, but it was cut off in a way of, not only is it not an option, but it's also dangerous. And so it kind of immediately took on this form of something that was very sacred and healthy, kind of shifting into something insidious and dangerous. So I think that, I can speak for me personally, it was a huge shift in, how I'm speaking to my clients, how I'm, engaging with myself or my family and friends pretty immediately. And I would argue, a pretty traumatic component of this. Okay, so if we're moving to tolerating uncertainty, I would say that it is pretty typical for humans not to tend to love uncertainty. Now, I'm sure there's people out there who do just truly love it, and good for you. I haven't met a ton of those people, I don't think. But the idea here is that we already function in uncertainty every single day, whether or not we are aware of it. So I like to tell my clients, think about when you came to my office today for session. Did you know for certain that I would be here? And the answer is typically like, no, but I thought you would, or I trusted that you'd be here. And so that's where we get this idea of, we're certain enough in our lives to function in this uncertainty. So we don't actually have 100% crystal clear confirmed certainty in life, but we get this idea of, I'm certain enough that this is something I can tolerate, or I'm certain enough, I'm sure enough that this is something I can do. Now, sometimes, certain pieces of uncertainty can become a fear stimulus. So when we're treating someone with an anxiety disorder, something that for someone who doesn't struggle in that way, something that might just not be an issue for them, not really something they give much thought to. For someone with let's say OCD, that would be something that for them feels intolerable. Fear feels like it has become that fear stimulus. So this idea of, I cannot tolerate or accept not knowing what will happen. So look at how, clinically we may see this in terms of checking, reassurance seeking, or cleaning, but also look at how, OCD or an anxiety disorder aside, I would say that largely the world was thrust into this position of, I don't know what will happen. This feels intolerable. I'm confused. And so I am engaging in behaviors that feel like they can give me some semblance of safety. So uh, throughout the year, I have had to give people bans. So banning certain behaviors that kind of cross the line from adaptive into excessive and problematic. So I've had people, stop compulsively checking the news or compulsively cleaning and kind of finding more of that balanced place. But again, I think at the very beginning when everybody was scrambling for, how can I form some stability or structure for myself? It was, a lot of like, okay, this is unknown, this is uncertain. I hate this. I don't like this. What can I do to feel a little bit a semblance of control here? And so in this idea of uncertainty, we look at, this perspective that the possibility of bad things happening is unacceptable. It's intolerable. It's unacceptable. It's not something that I am open to. And so typically when we're seeing this, it's looking at, lives getting smaller and smaller, which I would argue has happened over this past year. Janet and I were talking about travel. I miss travel so much. And all the soap that I have bought, I've gotten in scents that remind me of travels to have some sort of an escape. But looking at how, our lives did get smaller in ways over this past year, but, looking at this, coming back to this idea that if we're living in this idea that I cannot tolerate uncertainty, it's not something that I'm even open to. So therefore, I'm going to kind of close myself off, shut myself off, because even the possibility, whether, regardless of how probable this bad thing happening is, it's the idea of it happening that I cannot stand. And so I remove myself from the situation. And so this is something, this is a big component, this last point of the modality I use with my clients, exposure response prevention. But the idea here being that anxiety and uncertainty are actually universal and safe experiences. Now, this may be, I don't know if I have anyone out there thinking like, hold on, Beth, this sounds kind of off here. But here's the idea is that anxiety is there to really try and help us. So when we have a big test coming up or we have, we're in a dangerous situation, our anxiety is going to be trying to, steer us to a place of safety. And so looking at anxiety, not as, all over this bad thing, but actually it's something that tries to help us out. And, perhaps over the past year, it has helped us out in certain ways in terms of, we need to mask up and we need to wash our hands and social distance. But, looking at kind of getting to a place of, I can tolerate anxiety, I can tolerate uncertainty and the emotional responses that it holds, as they are universal and safe experiences. And when I say universal too, we will get into this a little bit later today, but the idea here being that it's a shared experience that we have with the rest of humanity. So we're not alone in our experience of these things, even though at times it may feel like, I'm the only one that is struggling with this and everyone else has it all together. Which leads us to this idea of this, reality of self-criticism. So first off, I would like to identify that, there is a very real difference between self-deprecating humor and actually being self-disparaging. So self-deprecating humor, typically we're looking at, someone who is, at least confident enough maybe to not take themselves so seriously. This can be a pretty adaptive way of engaging with some of our stumbles. But this idea of self-disparagement being, I am worthless or I am, valued less than other people, obviously being very different than that, humorous self-deprecation. This is something pretty different and pretty toxic as, in terms of what it creates and the reinforcement that it has with our behaviors. So here we're looking at self-criticism actually being what we call a safety behavior. So a safety behavior is really anything that we are doing, any action we're taking that is like it says, trying to have us be safe. So we can look at self-criticism actually as one of these safety behaviors geared towards acceptance. So this idea of, you know, humans being geared towards survival. If you're rejected by, the rest of the tribe, then, that doesn't equal survival. So if I can gain acceptance, then I survive. It doesn't matter maybe where I fall in the hierarchy, but I just need to survive. So really here we're looking at the idea of, if I can hurt myself before you do, I can remain safe. If I criticize myself before you do, in doing that, I can show you that I see my flaws. I see my struggles. I don't need you to point them out. And in that, I'm trying really to have you accept me, flaws and all. I think we can see the problem here is that, ideally we would have individuals being accepted without having the criticism involved. But this can be what's going on for ourselves as we're engaging in this cycle of self-criticism. And in this, it gives this illusion of control. So in this self-criticism, I'm believing that, making mistakes or not being perfect, it's something that's avoidable. So if it's avoidable, I should avoid it. And because I can't, since we're human and like perfection is not a thing, since I can't actually achieve that, I will always be losing. I will always be, failing in this. So it kind of gives us this toxic idea that I can control my fate, or I can control every aspect of my lives, when that's not even, something that we can do. But, I wanted to include this to really talk about, I wish that we could all be in person, so that, it's like, I would ask for everybody to raise their hand if at any point this year you felt a lack of control, or if you felt out of control at all. Yeah, both hands actually. Oh yeah, we can raise hands, some of us. So it's this idea that, if I see these parts of my life that feel out of my control, well, one thing I can control is beating myself up. And so that's something that I'm going to do. Self-criticism, there's also this misguided idea of self-betterment. I see this over and over and over again. I don't know if any of you have ever struggled with this, but this kind of self-dialogue, if I criticize myself enough, or if I beat myself up enough, I'll do better. And then I won't need to be so harsh on myself. But we see that this argument really collapses on itself, because this is lose-lose. So really what I'm setting up here in this cycle of, if I criticize myself, I'll do better, and then I won't need to be so hard on myself. So let's say you don't do better. Okay, well then what's the idea? Well, I wasn't hard enough. I need to be even harder on myself. I need to be even more critical to myself. Okay, so then we just reinforce the self-criticism. Now, what if you actually do better? Well, if I do better, it's because of the self-criticism. It was motivating. It pushed me to achieve what I wanted to do. So why would I give that up now? It's functional. So we see how this idea of self-criticism being kind of a tool, and I am using air quotes because it's not a tool, but if we're using it as a tool to better ourselves, it's something that will really, I see it as this like monster that latches onto our ankle, and we just don't shake it off, because, it's really in engaging in that, it reinforces that we need to keep engaging in that to be okay. So how do we combat this idea of self-criticism? And sidebar here, this is all in a nutshell. We could go on and on about all these topics all day long, which I would love to do, but I think you'd all get sick of my voice, and I would get sick of my voice too. So we're going through this, but again, there's a lot of great resources out there on these topics. So how do we combat this self-criticism, this cycle? So what we first can do is acknowledge and understand the criticism. So we can acknowledge its presence. It's not that we have to ignore it. It's not that we have to try and push it away. We can acknowledge that, oh, that was really critical, what I just heard myself say. And we can also understand the criticism. And what I mean by that is looking at it almost from a place of like, could we say gratitude? Like we talked about anxiety earlier, of like, I see that you're trying to help me. I see that, the self-criticism, the self-critic in me is really, trying to get me to be feeling safe and accepted and in control, but that's not actually what I need right now. And that's the last way I need it. So really showing, taking some time even to really sit with and create space for that part of ourselves that has been engaging in criticism as a way to have some semblance of control. Show compassion to it. We'll get into compassion a little bit later, but really showing it this gentle, loving care towards ourselves for the pain and the emotional response that came up from it. So again, I see that you're trying to help me, but this is actually something I don't need help with. And then what we're going to do is replace with a gentle and kind response. Now, this is easier said than done. I included some examples of how we can work through this. Okay, so this is something I hear pretty frequently, this idea of I'm so incapable. Everyone out there is being so productive during this quarantine, during this lockdown. I can't do anything right. And again, I don't know if any of you have felt this way. I saw a meme a little while ago that was like saying that there were different like stages to the quarantine. Like first we had the Netflix on the couch phase. We were all content with that. And then we moved on to creating sourdough bread, and we all had to perfect the sourdough. And then we moved on to plants, and we were all getting into planting. And then there was the Tiger King era. And it was just moving on through all these things that we had really been looking at. And, we could argue trying to find some community in these things that we were taking part of. But something I was hearing from clients is this idea that, well, this person is redoing their house, or this person is, making these fabulous meals, or this person is, becoming an artist during this time. And I'm just sitting here struggling, and I'm just sitting here scared and afraid, and I just don't have it together like they do. I heard that so often. And so really a way we can take this sentiment and kind of turn it into what we just talked about of kind of reprogramming, shifting really the self-criticism is start with a like, ow, that was harsh. That was rude. It's not helpful or necessary to compare myself to how I perceive someone else's journey during this time. There is not a right way to get through this, and I'm doing what I can to get through this very difficult time. So here I am acknowledging the pain. I'm acknowledging the emotional response that was present to me, ragging on myself for not, doing all these really amazing things that I'm seeing people, on social media, say that, hey, look at all these things that I'm doing, even though like you're not seeing the whole picture. So we are obviously engaging in perhaps some mind reading or seeing just a fraction of what the person is putting out there, and then judging ourselves based on this very small amount of information. But there is also no rule book on how to get through times like this. We're doing the best we can given the resources at our disposal. And so that's going to look different across the board for each person. But in the shift from this more self-criticizing statement to the statement that's more compassionate, is that really this is not about anyone else right now but me. So what can I offer myself? I'm going to encourage myself to keep going and not hold myself to what I perceive other people's standards are. I bet no one else struggles this much when doing insert a task. I'm so stupid, I will always fail. Now think about like saying this to someone else. Like even just thinking about that to me like makes like my stomach kind of like cringe up a bit. Like this is so mean. And yet oftentimes what I see when I ask people is like, would you say this to someone else? And pretty immediately the answer is like, no, I would never. That's awful. Like that's so mean. And so look at how, I think that there is maybe less of the inhibition to say things like this to ourselves. So in this statement, I wrote insert task because really this could be so individualized for what we are all going through, whether it's about the pandemic or something that we're working on in our personal lives or in therapy or at our job, some task that is difficult for us. So our response, how can we compassionately speak back to this self-critic voice? It's human to struggle. So actually, I am not alone in that. This isn't a me versus them scenario. This is a human scenario. So it makes sense that I am struggling and doing difficult things. I would say it makes sense that humanity is struggling during the pandemic. It is a human thing. And then we're moving on to this, which I really love. This idea of failure is actually a beautiful opportunity to learn and grow. I admire my desire and willingness to evolve. Now, in this, we're acknowledging our struggle. We're not running from it. We're not distracting from it. We're saying it is here and it is present and it is real. But I am also human. And so it makes sense that I'm going to struggle. I don't need to judge myself for why I am struggling or what I'm struggling with. I can just accept that it is what it is. And then looking at when I have someone in therapy bring up this idea of failure, I'll ask what their definition of failure is. And oftentimes we'll have different definitions, but I see failure not as inherently this bad thing. Failure is, an opportunity. It's we learned how not to do something. My son is learning to walk, and he will stumble and fall and fail and learn that that's not going to work, and so he'll get up and try again. And so it's not this black and white situation. Oh, you failed, you're out, you are done, you're out of the game, but you can continue. Take your time, get up when ready, and we'll continue to move forward. And then I wanted to end this with a pretty compassionate statement of, I actually admire myself. I admire my desire and willingness, not just the desire, but the willingness to follow through and to take risk and to do tasks that are difficult and to allow myself to struggle. That's something I admire about myself, because a part of my value system is continually evolving as a person. So just two statements on how we can take a self-critical statement and turn it into something that, again, we're not running away from the struggle that is, but we're reframing it to a place of more compassion. So what is self-compassion? I like to say, if I had $1 for every time I said the word self-compassion in the day, I would have many, many, many dollars. But we're going to look at 3 core components to self-compassion. I love breaking things down. I think for me personally, it just makes it easier to engage in if I can kind of walk myself through steps that make sense. And again, this is all based on research of Kristen Neff and Tara Brach. So looking at these components, one being self-kindness. So this idea of self-kindness, to put it very simply, is treating yourself the way you would treat a loved one, the way you would treat a dear friend. But when we're working on this idea of self-kindness, if we're looking at it as a continuum of, maybe when I started this, I started in a place of being very harshly critical. I thought it was really helpful and motivating. I want to perhaps get over more to a place of self-kindness, but this journey in the meantime kind of looks daunting. So kind of moving from that place of criticism more to the place of neutrality is great. That's progress. I will try to help my clients get to a place of neutrality first, because we can continue towards self-kindness, but we don't want to stop at the neutrality place. So if we're stopping self-judgment, but I'm just kind of sitting here silently, not offering myself any soothing or comfort or anything, it's like, well, okay, great, you didn't beat yourself up, but did you offer yourself anything kind, Beth? So we're looking at actively comforting. So keeping in mind that this self-kindness is active. It is not something that you are going to passively do, but it is something we actively offer, like we do with our friends and loved ones. So here we're looking at showing ourselves empathy for our struggles, for our failures, for our stumbles and our falls, versus attacking ourselves for those things. So again, would you say this to a loved one? If the answer is no, then you got to change it. Because if we're going to be congruent in who we are as people, this is something we really need to work on. I value humanity enough to act in kind, gentle, and loving ways. And that's going to include myself, because again, like we said earlier, I'm a part of humanity. I'm a human just like everyone else. So one place we can get stuck is the second quote I included. I will be kind to myself when I feel ready or deserving. So the hard part here is if we're taking this stance, I will only offer this act of self-kindness when I feel like I deserve it, when I feel ready. And in the meantime, I'm going to continue the criticism. What do you think is going to happen? We're not going to get to that place where we're then, saying like, I feel ready. I've been beating myself up for 100 years, but now I'm ready. No, it doesn't work like that. So I would argue too that the times when you don't feel ready, the times when you don't feel you deserve self-kindness is the time that you need it the most. And so it's this pretty radical idea of I'm going to do something, I'm going to offer myself something, even though maybe no bone in my body wants to do that. I'm going to do it anyway, even though I don't feel ready or prepared for it. And then looking at what comfort can I offer myself in this moment? What do I need? If you had a friend come up to you and say, "Here's my struggle. I'm really, struggling with this situation." What would you say to them? Would you just sit there and stare at them? Probably not. You might ask them or validate, like, that sucks. That sounds really difficult. What can I do for you? How can I help you? And that's something that we can ask ourselves. Maybe it feels silly or weird, and that's okay. I like silly, I like weird. But the idea here, again, is congruency in that I will speak to myself and offer myself the things I do for others. And so I like to kind of put it this way of, what life is easier here, living 24/7 with a bully or living 24/7 with a friend who respects you. And this is the option we have with ourselves, because at the end of the day, the only person we have access to 24/7 is ourselves. And so, I will always argue, in a respectful way, of course, but I will always argue that it is better to live with a friend than a bully. And so this is that idea of, again, I will offer myself what I offer others, and I will be a friend to myself, even if it's feeling like it's not something I can do, because we are capable. It just takes that practice. So a second component of self-compassion is this idea of common humanity, which is a pretty powerful thing. So the idea here being that, being human is to be imperfect. That's just what it is. This is something that we all experience. It's not unique to any of us. Even though when we are in that place of struggle, regret, disappointment, whatever it is, we may feel like this is just me, which makes me feel perhaps even more isolated. So, looking at struggle, regrets, disappointment, all of these things that we feel are shared experiences with the rest of humanity. Now, it's not saying that we're all going to go through the same thing, and this isn't the struggle Olympics in, who has it worse, but this is the idea of what I am feeling now, the pain I am feeling now, my neighbor has also felt, perhaps with a different situation, perhaps in a different way, in the way that they experience pain, but we have both experienced pain and experienced what it feels like to live with these things. So in that, I am a part of humanity. I am, a member of this big community. So if we forget this, which self-criticism loves to kind of keep us trapped and isolated, we feel more isolated from humanity, which can lead to these really problematic messages, feeling disconnected, feeling unsafe, feeling unique in failure, feeling insufficient and unworthy. So here is where, when we get kind of caught up in this idea that the struggle is unique to me, so often I have heard the idea that, well, everyone else deserves kindness, Beth, except for me. There's just something inherently flawed with me and I don't deserve it. So think about the disconnection that person may feel. Again, we're geared towards human survival. So the feeling sense, of not being safe can really be present in that experience. And so, I think this common humanity, maybe it sounds kind of simplistic, but I think it's so incredibly powerful, that when we allow ourselves to be a part of the imperfection of being human, we allow ourselves beautiful opportunities to grow and learn. I will, again, always respectfully argue, but I think that to be perfect would be so completely boring. There's no learning that happens there. There's no room for growth. There's no exploration. There's no curiosity. If we were perfect, I honestly believe that'd be a pretty boring way to live. So I think the shift here, looking at, being imperfect, shifting from it being a bad and dangerous thing to it being just a thing, without morality being put on it. But it is a thing that we all experience and have share similarities in. Okay, and then looking at the third component being mindfulness. So mindfulness, to break it down again very simply, is a non-judgmental acceptance of what is in this present moment. And then when we look at this radical acceptance, we're looking at, I'm accepting what is versus what I think this should be. So I accept the moment as it is. I accept myself as I am, rather than struggling with what I think I should be or with what I think I should be doing. So in this, we're recognizing when suffering is taking place. We can't heal what we're not allowing ourselves to feel. And so when we are recognizing the feeling of suffering, the feeling of what is going on for us, we're actually honoring that part of us that is in pain. And then in that, we can shift from a focus on the actual failure or the mistake, or the dropping the ball, whatever we did, to we can actually focus on the emotional response. So the pain, the disappointment, the fear that is coming up for us. So we're actually moving from, the actual events to now something that we can show ourselves honor and respect for, having to go through that pain. So in this moment, I acknowledge that this is a very hard time for me. My pain is worthy of a kind, gentle, and loving response. So in this, you didn't hear any fighting against, the thing that happened. Well, that wasn't fair, or that was so stupid, or I shouldn't have done that. That's not helpful for us to kind of get into that spiral. But what we can do is acknowledge that this is a hard time, and then create space to be honoring towards our pain. And then with this mindfulness, what we're doing is we're accepting that all thoughts and emotions are going to come and go. They will ebb and flow on their own time, but we are accepting their presence, but then we get to choose what we do with them. So am I latching on to this self-critic within me? Am I really spiraling with this idea that, oh, I made a mistake, or this is a hard, I'm having a hard time getting my schoolwork done on the computer? Am I, struggling with accepting that? Or am I, accepting that that is what is currently happening? Let me make space for the pain or the disappointment or the struggle that feels. And then I get to choose what I do with that. Okay, so self-compassion exercise. So this is something that I like to do with my clients. I also like to do with myself. So I recognize that I feel blank, and yet I know that is untrue because blank. Instead of criticism, I will offer myself another blank. So here we are. So how we can plug things into this statement of self-compassion. So in this first box, we are going to insert, essentially what we're doing is inserting this thought that we're translating as a feeling. And yet I know that is untrue because, and then we're actually going to put in some evidence to the contrary. I'll give you an example of this in a little bit. So we're going to put in our evidence. So really we're engaging in some thought challenging here. And then instead of criticism, what am I going to offer myself? I've asked myself, hey, Beth, what do you need? How can I help you? So a little self-disclosure here, a little example. When I was about to start my grad school program, I was so excited. I love school. I love learning. And I was ready. I had like my backpack. I was just totally stoked about starting grad school. But what do you think I did? I read the wrong calendar. I read the calendar for the start of undergrad classes versus graduate school classes. A very, very fancy move on my end. So what did I do? I missed the first day of my grad school program. And imagine the shame, the pain, the embarrassment that came up for me when I realized what had happened. So immediately, and I wish I had had this formula then that I know now, but here's how we can plug this in. So I recognize that I feel what did my brain tell me? My brain told me all sorts of things. You're incompetent, you're incapable, you can't be a therapist because you can't even make it to the first day of class, Beth. So I can put in here that I recognize that I am feeling incapable. I am feeling alone. I am feeling stupid, whatever it is. And yet I know that's untrue, because making a mistake does not make me a mistake. Making a mistake is human, and it doesn't have anything to do with my ability to engage in grad school, or have the future that I want to create for myself. So in here I'm putting this really thought challenging statement. And then, that's really not enough, because that's still, there's still that emotional response. There's still that emotional pain. And so we want to move from focusing on the event to focusing on the feeling. So instead of criticism, I will offer myself compassion. I will offer myself love. I will offer myself a moment to cry, and then I'm going to email the professor and advocate for myself and let them know what happened. I'm going to reach out to someone who loves me and get some comfort from them as well. One thing that I do like to have my clients do is a good self-compassion exercise as well, is to engage in gentle, loving touch with yourself. So a couple of ways that we can do this is by cupping our hands on our cheeks, and just softly and gently feeling our face, feeling our skin. Another thing we can do is actually give ourselves a hug. So you do it how it feels comfortable for you. And I've had people even kind of rock themselves back and forth with their eyes closed. Sure, does it feel weird? Perhaps, but it also feels great, because in that moment we can offer ourselves something that perhaps we're not getting in any other way. I also like to have people gently stroke their arms and just feel their skin. I love to have people even put their hands on their heart and feel their heartbeat, and remember that we are all connected in that common humanity that we share. So a little fun story from my own past here, but this exercise is a way to acknowledge what happened, acknowledge what came up for us, but also acknowledge that I don't have to immediately sit with this idea of self-criticism, and I actually can kind of choose the course of action I take moving forward. And there's my references. And I don't know how we're doing on time. I'm wondering, is this our Q&A time slot? Okay. So any questions?
Hey, Beth. Thank you for that presentation. It was very, very informative. First question is, can you make suggestions regarding how to shift my thoughts and actions to focus more on what is in my control to create or influence?
What was the last part? To create or influence?
Uh-huh.
Okay, that's a great question. So looking at, I kind of look at it as zones here. So looking at our zones of control, I picture even a hula hoop around me. The things that I actually have some say in reside in my zone, and things that are outside of my control, things that I might want to really control, other people's behaviors, the way other people treat each other, but acknowledging that that's not actually something that, I can have any sort of control in. And in trying to control something that I have no control over, I actually get less in control because I'm not taking care of myself. I'm not taking care of the things that are actually still in my zone of control. So for that, I even just like to have people mentally picture, like, is this something that's in your zone of control, or is it outside? And if it's outside, show yourself compassion for like that urge to, whatever it is, help that person or create that change you want to see. Look at, is there something I can do for myself to help in this situation, and focus on that.
Thank you. My next question, Janet probably has another one, but this isn't a question that was posed directly to me. When I listen to my thoughts and I track what I've been placing my energy in, I am concerned. Do you have any suggestions for the person who is tracking their thoughts but feel concerned about what is surfacing?
Okay, so in this question, I'm hearing like I'm concerned about maybe the content of my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so with that, And like my brain goes to, since I treat OCD so often, we talk a lot about that the content of our, intrusive thoughts is not inherently meaningful or valid. So, looking at our thoughts in terms of, I don't want to do a deep dive into the content, into what's there, but perhaps I could even, shift and look at how am I feeling? What is coming up for me emotionally in response to these thoughts? And that's something that I can, again, like talk to myself as if I were a friend, like, hey, Beth, these thoughts are making you feel X, Y, and Z. What's actually something that would be helpful right now? Do I need to reach out to someone else? Is this a situation that I need some outside support or help with? Or is this something that I'm really kind of getting caught up in trying to control things that are out of my control? And instead, what I can do is, maybe take 10 minutes to practice some mindfulness or to reground myself in the here and now, and take that next step forward based on that.
Beth, thank you so much. There were wonderful comments as you were speaking, people just feeling validated, saying how helpful what you were saying. I think nearly everyone, I can speak for myself, I can't speak for others, saw themselves, at least at moments, in the comments that you were making. The question, and it's been no doubt a stressful, challenging time, and we've had good days and bad days. That's normal, that's natural, that's human. At what point do you think somebody should perhaps seek professional help? What triggers for you suggest this isn't a bad day or just a completely understandable response and wake up and fight again tomorrow?
That's a great question, Janet. And I'm excited to talk about this. So I think, what we want to look at is, well, sidebar, I'm biased and think everyone could use a therapist because it's awesome. Therapy rocks. And so, if you're thinking like, should I or shouldn't I, like, go do it. And obviously, I know it's not as simple as that. There's a lot of issues with access. But anyway, with this idea, I think we want to look at like the functionality. So, are you able to engage in your, day-to-day life in these, we call them too in the world of therapy, ADLs. So activities of daily living are these some things that you can, offer yourself consistently, or are those kind of going out the window? So we can even kind of make it very, very basic. Are you brushing your teeth? Are you washing and brushing your hair? Are you getting dressed? Are you eating and drinking water throughout the day? And again, those are pretty basic, but at times they don't feel basic. At times they feel pretty insurmountable. And so I would say that definitely if it's something that you're feeling like, this isn't just like a slew of bad days, it's actually like impeding my ability to function in the world as I want to, or it's impeding my ability to be the person I want to be, I would say that, that's a great kind of indicator that, we all deserve to have other people on our team, but at that point, perhaps, it is looking at someone, a professional mental health clinician coming alongside you to help you with that. Because yes, this has been a year of struggle after struggle after struggle. And, I will always tell people that you don't have to have a diagnosis to seek professional help.
Beth, there's a great question in the chat. Carol asks, how do you help children when they are judgmental and unkind to themselves?
Ooh, that's a great question. So in that, I would really want to know like what the function of that behavior is. I'm curious, is someone outside of them telling them these things? We know that kids are going to mirror what they are seeing and what they are being taught. So, is this coming from kind of an outside perspective? Is this also something that they're seeing people that they are around frequently or people that they live with treat themselves? So if we are around kids and we're treating ourselves this way, if we're talking about ourselves that way, they're learning that that's how humans are supposed to act and behave. So that could also be more of a systemic issue where we would have, maybe family psychoeducation. But I think shifting from that judgment to looking at, let's celebrate the things that we like about ourselves. And that also includes the ability to take risk, the willingness to take risk and fail and learn and keep going. And so, kind of moving, and I don't know exactly, obviously, what's going on in this situation, but kind of looking at a shift in the dialogue, perhaps from, maybe more of accomplishment-based praises to, who you are as a person based praises and recognition.
Beth, it's a follow-up to that question, kind of, sort of. In
Okay.
order to make a necessary change, I am willing to risk the disapproval and lack of support from others. Do you have a caution or do you have support for that statement?
Cynthia, could you repeat it again? I want to make
Yeah.
sure I fully grasp it.
Got it. In order to make a necessary change, I am willing to support the disapproval and lack of support from others. The question is, do you have a caution or do you have another statement that you would make in support of that?
Okay, thank you for repeating. So first, I'm curious, what is the change that we're talking about? But I think that, I applaud the bravery in that statement of I'm willing to take the risk of others being disappointed or not supporting me, because that is a risk we take in life. We don't have certainty. Again, it's that tolerance of uncertainty of how things will go. Sometimes we, try and fly and we fall to the ground flat on our face, and that's okay. Not everything goes according to plan, but looking at, it sounds like the idea there is a willingness to do what that individual needs to do for themselves, perhaps to work on something they want to, and being willing to let other people down, so to say, which is a pretty positive thing, because we don't want to get caught up in, I will only do things in my life if I'm sure everyone around me is in support of it, because that's ultimately not going to be sustainable. So I applaud the bravery there.
Okay. There is a question in the chat. In the context of contemporary events relating to COVID, do you think God is angry with us?
Oh, that is a very big and loaded question. That, I would say that's up to each of ourselves in, what we perceive God to be, or, how we're looking at that. But I'm going to be very honest that I side with science here, and that this is a scientific issue, not this idea of divine punishment. Again, that's just my opinion here. But I think that that's probably a question for each person to answer for themselves.
Thank you, Beth. I turn it to you, Janet.
Sure. So Beth, we've talked a good bit about thoughts and a good bit about feelings. And we know that at least at the extremes, feelings really can have physical manifestation. That's why some of those self-soothing techniques that you were talking about can be helpful to love yourself, to appreciate your body. And so what I'm wondering is, in session or when somebody is feeling overwhelmed, panicked, those times that it is thought and feeling, but it's also physicality. What do you recommend as sort of taking that time to care for yourself and de-escalate?
Yeah, so I love some grounding techniques to be utilized in that moment. One thing I really love to do, and it's aptly named, is just to, get your feet out of your shoes and stick them on the ground. Look at how you're sitting, perhaps in your chair. Oftentimes, we can look at the messages our body is sending our brain. So are we sitting in a fetal position? Are our feet curled up on the chair? When we're kind of feeling, that is really not helping us stay present in the moment. Take your shoes off, put your feet on the floor, rub your feet on the carpet, the ground, describe how you feel, what that feels like. I'll ask people, what does it feel to sit on that chair or that couch right now? Can you describe to me what your jacket feels like? What's something that you're smelling right now? Checking in with each of our senses, again, in a non-judgmental way. So not there's a tag on my shirt and I really hate that, but I feel the itchiness of the tag on my shirt and I accept that. having, checking with each of our senses in a mindful way can be very grounding, bring us back down to this present moment. But another thing that's really powerful, may sound a little simple, but it's very powerful, is looking at, where am I holding tension in my body? Are my shoulders tense? Are my fists clenched? Is my jaw clenched? And then looking at my breathing. Am I holding my breath? Am I perhaps hyperventilating? And so this is where practicing some diaphragmatic breathing can be really helpful, to try and re-regulate our breathing pattern and get us back to a place of, closer to homeostasis. When we're sleeping, we're breathing diaphragmatically. And so it gives our brain this message that I must be okay, because we're breathing how we breathe when we're sleeping, and we're okay when we're sleeping. So I would take someone through like their body posture, checking with their senses, and then checking with how they're breathing as well.
Great. So we have time for just one last question before we'll give you a chance to offer a closing comment to the group. We have several people that we know are clinical social workers, definitely some parents in the audience. And you had talked about how your practice has had to adapt because behaviors that you used to be encouraging people to lean into became dangerous, or at least not as advisable as before. So I would just like to ask you, when the goal of the therapist or the parent is to use some exposure to dismantle a phobia or expand
Yes.
somebody's range of comfort, what types of things how are you adapting to the current climate within your practice?
Sure. So this is where, I love being super weird and creative. So this is just perfect. But I think it's, I keep in mind, and this is what I've told all my clients, is that I will follow CDC guidelines personally and professionally. But beyond that, we're still going to challenge things, because this is not a time to give up. If ever, there was a time to keep pushing harder, this is going to be it, because we want to make sure that we're keeping ourselves swimming above water here. So I think that's where personally I've gotten really creative of, telehealth has been beautiful in this way, that I'm actually in people's homes where I wouldn't perhaps normally be. And so I've said so many like amazing sentences: carry me to the bathroom so I can watch you contaminate your hands. And so they carry me in their computer, and then we touch things in their bathroom and have them really sit with that, or doing some food exposures, or just doing some things within the home that we're following CDC guidelines, but we're also not allowing mental illness to take over and just kind of have free reign during this time. So there's definitely still things we can do. And the reason why we want to do that is because once we are able to go and do the other things out in the world, I want to make sure that we're at a place where we can hit the ground running. So we have continued to make progress in the way that we can. So you're still going to feel challenged. You're still going to feel anxious and have to sit with that uncertainty, but we're just going to do it under the guidelines that we've been given by the CDC.
That makes great sense. So this always happens that we can make an hour go by so very quickly, and we are at time. Before we sign off for the day, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to leave us with a final thought, anything that you'd like to share with the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Janet. Well, I want to say that I am super appreciative for all of you, even though I'm staring at my computer screen right now. I know you're behind it. Thank you for all of you for showing up. I know that Zoom fatigue is very real, and we've been spending a lot of time in front of screens this year. So I appreciate you taking the time out to come and join me for an hour. I think my last thing to say would be, please, please, please be kind to yourself and be kind to others. I have some faith that you are all probably maybe more kind to others than yourself. So maybe work on the yourself part, but we're in that together. So yeah, so I just want to encourage you to do that.
Beth, thank you so much. And I hope you're getting to see some of the chat as people are just really appreciating this time that we've spent together, and really wise words to help get us through. Thank you for doing this, Cynthia.
Thanks,
as
guys.
always, thank you for being the co-hostess with the mostest. To our audience, such a pleasure to spend this time with you, and we hope to see you again very soon. Please do join us. Take care, stay safe.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.